Okay, part 2 of this. I've slid the harness down on the table some. This is pretty much where the fuse block connector is. I'm going to leave that there for now. Tag module lead, and everything we're doing is going to be working this direction. We're going to be taking out these wires we've removed from the computer and the C2 fuse plug and the other connectors. This right here went on top of the intake manifold, so the throttle body would have been facing my hand here. And so you're looking at the driver's side of the engine, passenger side of the engine. And basically I go to a leg of the harness, and as I work my way up the trunk line, any branch I get to, I work on that branch, finish it, and then I just continue on down. So the first thing we see here is injectors, the driver's side, and the coil packs. There's really nothing to do on these. If you want to take the loom off to replace it, you can. And then on this other side, we have an injector here, alternator, and then this is the evap purge solenoid. It's the green, white, and pink 2-pin. This can be removed. And then continuing on that branch, it runs to the coolant temp sensor. We got a damaged connector there. We'll replace that. The ground of the engine block. AC compressor. This is AC high side pressure sensor. Oil level, crank sensor, and starter solenoid. And we'll completely unwrap this and put new loom on it. We'll be removing the oil pressure, AC compressor, AC pressure sensor. We will tape this back in the harness when we're done. A lot of layers of tape in some of these junctions. Just gotta take your time and be patient. Just keep in mind the way the harness laid out with the coils, and 3 of the injectors went this way. I'm going to go ahead and unwrap these because I'm going to put all new loom on this harness. Started on This is the front of the motor right here. This runs down behind the alternator to the driver's side to the coolant temp sensor in the front of the cylinder head. Goes down to the oil pan, across the motor at the oil pan rail, and then straight back to the starter on the passenger side. This ground attaches to the block near the motor mount on the driver's side. This is all AC. If you're patient, you can cut all the tape off and you can get quite a bit of lengths of wire and reuse this wire in other places. Again, this is the AC pressure sensor and AC clutch. These three wires should come right out now. Why we don't tape everything up going to the computer, because if you missed one of these, then you got a straight wire and you got to take it back apart. This AC compressor, it'll have the control wire will come right out, and it will have a ground going to the engine block ground. So if you trace this back, it'll go to a splice pack. I need 2 grounds at my fuse block, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this here. I'm going to lay this back in the harness. I'm going to use this ground wire. We just label this ground. Back to this, we removed the AC. Now this ground eyelet went near the power steering pump and the motor mount is probably the most common one to get left unconnected, and I get a call and they tell me they have no spark. This grounds the coil packs. Now what I'll do is I'll take this eyelet and I'm going to run this to the back of the heads. There's two other grounds on the truck harnesses at the back of the cylinder heads. And this is just the right length. I'm going to reroute this. You'll see here in a little bit when we get there. I'm going to route this with the other grounds so all the grounds are in the same place. So all that should be left on this lead now should be the oil level sensor. We'll get that out. I always want to, we're cutting this open, I don't want the lengths of the harnesses to change. So as soon as I get this oil pressure sensor out from the crank sensor and the starter, I'm going to go ahead and go back with black tape. And I'm going to wrap this. That length can't change. We'll put some new loom on this too. See how this loom just disintegrates from the heat. I'm going to look real close on this crank sensor plug. If anyone's ever done a starter or where they pull the motor out, sometimes these can get tugged on and they'll pull these right out of the connectors and the pins will be damaged. Okay, we pulled the oil level out of that. There's a signal wire going back to the computer. And there'll also be a ground going to a ground splice. So I'm just cut this right here. We'll trace that down later. To maintain the same length on all this, I started taping that. I'm just going to go ahead and tape this up. It's a crank sensor, it's kind of important, so layer tape and then this is going to get new loom on top of it. Close where the temp sensor was. There's that ground splice. I'm just going to cut that off that ground splice. That was for the low oil switch. Almost right where that tape was. that back in there. We'll go ahead and fix this. Very handy terminal tool to have. It's a Delphi 12094429. I don't think you actually need it on this later style coolant temp sensor. And it's just broke. Good thing we're replacing it. Clarity doesn't really matter on this sensor, but we'll make sure we put it back on the same way. 2 snaps. That's done. I'm going to put some, this tape's made by Tesa, T-E-S-A. It's a woven fabric. I don't wrap every piece of loom like this, just the crank sensor down in this location, just for added protection from abrasion and heat. And this will get new loom. Go ahead and take this evap solenoid out. This is the front injector on the driver's side, and this is the alternator. There's the evap. There's another splice there. The control, the green, should already be unhooked. Should pull out. And now, the pink wire goes to the fuse block. So we'll pretty much, you can just pull on it and look for where you've got a pink wire that's pulling. You just trace that to the fuse block. The process of elimination will get rid of the pinks that we don't need. Now on this alternator, on some of these 03 and up, there is a third blue wire. I believe it went to the body control module or something. I don't really know what it's for, but it can come out. It's not needed. And you will see it's loose. So I just pull it up to the alternator. Here's where that Delphi tool comes in. Pop this terminal retainer. And this tool just goes right in there. And that pulls right out. Now we've got an empty cavity in there we want to seal. You can use silicone if you don't have like a factory plug. There's a plug available like that you can put in there if you got it. And put your terminal retainer back on it. These three kind of all laid together. So again, this is where kind of keeping the lengths comes in place. And that branch is done. We're ready to reloom this one. This is a tedious process. Now we can move on. This will be everything on the driver's side. Again, this was the goes on top of the intake here. Knock sensors. Oil pressure, we'll be removing that. It's the cam position. That's one of the other grounds. Remember, we're going to relocate this ground right in with it. It's about the perfect length. This continues on down to transmission, oxygen sensors, speed sensor, and because this is a flex fuel harness, we also have the flex fuel sensor. We'll start unwrapping this. This is going to be flex fuel connector, sensor, and rear oxygen sensor. And I'm going to go ahead and just cut it off at this splice. This will be your front oxygen sensor and transmission range sensor. Here was the rear O2 and that flex fuel. Again, this was the rear O2 and the flex fuel sensor. You see here they had a ground just for the flex fuel sensor. Went in that eyelet. We'll cut out that ground. Part of that rear O2. Sometimes if you can get it to unwrap, it's easier than cutting it. The glue on this tape soaks into the wires and makes this solid so the wires don't pull. The older the harness, the worse that gets. Alright, it's all unwrapped. Sometimes you just this will break that glue up. We'll go ahead and get these O2 sensor wires out. One of these powers was for the flex fuel sensor, one was for the O2 sensor. Of course, these pinks will go back to the fuse block plug, and the rest of those will go to the computer, which we've already removed, so they should pull right out. Pull on that and locate that pink wire. And this is the flex fuel signal wire. And I was just thinking as I went through the PCM pinouts, I don't remember removing this, because I don't think it's on my pinout. Sure enough, as I pull on that, it goes towards the computer. So, example right there why I don't take the computer up. So I'll have to go back in the computer connector and pull this white fuel composition signal wire is what it's called. I need to add that to my pinout list to remove. Now if you wanted to keep E85 flex fuel, you keep the sensor of course, but I'll go ahead and cut it here. Again, this is quite tedious. Down the tan and the purple to pull out. transmission, speed sensor, front oxygen sensor. Now a range sensor here. We're going to pull this oil pressure sensor out. It's laying right there. See how it just lays in there? Obviously GM just kind of laid these together as assemblies. So sometimes you get lucky, you know, all three of them are together in the harness. You know, even right here, all three of those wires are laying next to each other in the harness. There's the oil pressure sensor removed in one piece. This was that extra ground to the fuel composition sensor. We don't need it. Here's that ground that we're moving from the motor mount power steering pump area. The only other thing we got left here is some of these wires on this neutral safety switch. There's a number of wires on this switch that the computer uses for gear position. Helps control idle in between gears. Really helps if you've got an aftermarket camshaft installed and you utilize those tables in the tuning. All those signals are on the small 4-pin plug. They call it signal A, B, C, and P, which means parity. So error checking. All the wires on this one can be pretty well removed except for there's one ground wire that is needed for this other plug to function right. So what the rest of these wires are neutral safety switch, which was part of the starter circuit through the factory fuse block. You could use this control a relay to control the neutral safety switch if you wanted to in your swap. There's also reverse light. So say you want to use this to activate your reverse lights on your swap. Key hot power here, light green wire goes to reverse lamps. I'm taking this all out on this one. I'm going to leave the black with the white stripe, which is the ground. And I'm going to leave a little bit of a lead on it, and I'm going to cut these off. And then these will be removed. And these will all be loose. We've already disconnected them and removed them from the C2 plug. See how they're just coming out of the harness like they're already run together. Now the pink wires here, they were power for the reverse lights, and I'm not sure what the other one was for. Maybe the safety switch that doesn't let you pull out of gear unless you put on the brake pedal. I'm not quite sure. But you'll have to trace those back to the fuse block plug and cut those pinks off. That one should pull out. We got two pinks left. We'll trace them to the fuse block. That should be everything we're removing. I'll get some tape. We'll work backwards from the transmission plug, so any slack gets worked towards the main trunk of the harness. I'm using this more just to keep the harness, all the wires bundled together. Now the O2 sensor had a short lead here. I'll usually give this a longer lead. So depending on your headers arrangement or manifolds, it gives you flexibility on where to put that O2 sensor. So range switch. A little way back in. Looks like I went a little too far. So I leave these in the harness, so if somebody wanted to use that function of those, you could. Basically, I'll take this up to about the junction of where the cam sensor and the ground came out earlier. So then I'll lay the cam sensor back in here. O2 sensor. And these grounds. You kind of want to make sure that the lengths are going to be okay through here. You'll see this, there'll be a little loop. This one's a little long. It's just the way it is. So now we got our two grounds, cam sensor, and an O2 sensor. Sometimes you'll get this with a length and you just, as long as you know it isn't pulled tight or somewhere else and they got the right length here, it's okay just to double back on itself. You'll see that a lot of times from a factory. I'll stop right there for now. Knock sensor, cam sensor, 2 grounds, and a driver's side O2 sensor. Range sensor, speed sensor, and transmission. This does have a damaged connector, so we'll go and fix that. I'm just going to wrap up that leg of the harness. I'm going to go ahead and loom up this harness. Note about these rain sensor plugs is they very often come in damaged, and GM used a some sort of a sealer inside the range switch on the side of the transmission. And in its close proximity to the catalytic converter, the range sensor would get hot and all that glue would run out and it gets stuck in this connector. So very often I see them damaged. And I'll probably put, I keep new connectors on hand for that reason. I gotta find my heat gun and melt some of this so I can take it apart. So I'll probably do that a little bit later. Well, there's that side done. I don't have that many wires left to remove. It's like a O2 sensor and coolant switch and maybe an AC sensor, something. This part of the harness, this would be the passenger side back. This ran across the top of the harness, the map sensor, or top of the intake, map sensor. This swung back around forward. These are your injectors and coils for the passenger side throttle body. This part went across the firewall to the dryer AC, over by the AC, and then you had your front and rear O2 sensor on that side, and then this leg went up front, a coolant switch, and mass airflow sensor. I'm going to reroute some of this, you'll see here in a minute. This is front O2 and rear O2. The front one's the shorter one. I'm just going to go ahead and cut the rear off. So here's all the wires for the rear oxygen sensor. It will come out. Front one stays. Coolant switch will be removed. So this is the front O2 sensor, mass airflow sensor. This is the rear O2 wiring that's coming out, and the coolant switch wiring that's coming out. And I'm really not sure. This is usually sits over by the AC dryer, but it's not used. I'm not really sure what it is. I know it's not on the engine, so I remove it. One of the heater controls for the rear O2's coming out here. I'm going to cut this coolant temp sensor, coolant level. Cut this other one that was by the dryer. Get this blue and this green out of here. Tan and this purple out, which is the signal for the rear O2 sensors that we're removing. that's all the wires we had left over, I believe. What you'll have left here is a couple grounds. It looks like we got a pink wire or two we got to trace out. This would have been a power wire to the rear oxygen sensor. So we tug on that, we should be able to follow it to the fuse block. And completely remove it. So yeah, we got two grounds left here that went to those two plugs. One was the coolant temp, one was the blue one. And we'll just trace these to the ground splice. And we'll cut it free from that ground splice. And remove it. Okay, so now we've got mass airflow sensor, and front oxygen sensor. I'm gonna go ahead and tape up right here so we can make sure we don't lose the shape of the harness. Again, this is the back of the intake right here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so this oxygen sensor shoots straight back. And it's going to be way long, and we'll shorten this. So that's alright. I'm going to coil it up for right now. So this is the bank 2 oxygen sensor, passenger side. And then it's the mass airflow sensor. Originally that mass airflow sensor went with the O2s. They went across the firewall, went to the frame rail, O2 sensors went back. Mass air came forward to the airbox. And this is where I changed it up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and open up this injector harness. And I'm going to lay the mass airflow sensor in with the injector and throttle body wiring. Unwrap the coil. I'm going to put new loom on it. And I'll unwrap this other ground. There's 3 grounds total. 3 ground eyelets. They're now all back of the motor. Now I'm going to open up this splice right here. I'll take this mass air. Untangle it. ahead and lay these rear 02s in here. That's going to go towards down towards the transmission bell housing. And here are the injectors and mass air. I just like to reroute that. It seems to work better in swaps. You don't always know where the mass air is going to end up. And it'll split off right up here. So from the throttle body, you've got probably 4 feet to figure out where to put the mass airflow sensor. Put some new loom on the mass air. I really need to sharpen this. Basically, I'm going to make this O2 sensor the same length as this one. Approximately. I don't have to be exact. Now I cut and shorten this. You could just double it back on itself, and this is just how I do it. On the oxygen sensors, you want to be really careful about solder splices and heat shrink. The smallest amount of moisture on the wire, on the O2 sensor signal wire, is enough to carry a current and really screw with the signal the O2 sensor produces. Even so much as a nick on the insulation, like when I was removing the tape, if you nick an O2 sensor signal wire, and say you run through a mud puddle or something and you splash it and it gets wet, and you've got a nick on another ground wire, another power wire, it's enough to throw that sensor off. sure I assemble this right. Call that a terminal presence assurance. There's a little tang on the terminal that's supposed to hold it in there. Just in case that was a fail, this is a backup. And then this is a CPA, connector presence assurance, and that's the technical name of them. And I'll reuse these. I think that's going to wrap up this part of things. The next thing will be to tape this back in, which locates it on top of the intake, wrap up the main trunk line, and then proceed to start working on the fuse block.